So this is presentation. So what was my thought when watching our Dunkirk clip and our initial plan? The Dunkirk clip will be stuck before me in this video. So yeah, we watched it without audio to make those fresh ideas and kind of generate the ideas of like what we would expect to hear, rather than going off what we've already heard and then figuring it out. We figured we needed plane sounds and gunfire effects, because that was one of the two main kind of sounds that we could see. If that makes sense. Um, we kind of focused on the plane first, which was the bass effect. It was a God bass, a GODD bass, with some crazy effects running on it, but that's not what is necessary to talk about right now. That'll be later. Um, and then we looked for a bit of inspiration. We ended up going for quite heavy sounds. 1 Minute by Triple X, which I believe has Travis Barker on the drums, the punk drummer, which was why it was very cool. And then A New Level by Pantera for the gunfire section, for the actual main riff, like when it's like the kind of peak, that's what we wanted, that kind of Pantera sound thing. And then Plane Crash, we used the drop C PRS guitar that Ethan has, for dive bomb effect, plus explosions once it hits the ground, an underwater explosion on top of just a general explosion to create the sound of the water being moved, but then also the explosion itself. So in the 4 week plan for essentially Dunkirk, this is what we can be seeing. In the third page of the PowerPoint, you can see that week 1, we used the God bass preset as the original sound, and then what we did is we stacked multiple pitch shifters on it. So we had one running on the main channel itself, which I believe was a octave down, and then 3 pitch shifters all on separate send channels to each target different harmonics in a different level, because the V12 Merlin engine used in the Spitfires, which is what the people we are watching are flying in, has a lot of natural fifth and octave harmonics, because that is naturally how a V12 engine works. Don't ask me why, I haven't quite learned enough, but they naturally create fifth and octave harmonics. We then added a phaser to that main track just to give it a bit of a moving air effect. We don't want too much of an effect, we just wanted a bit more of like the idea that the sound is not just steady, because a plane engine isn't always steady. And then once it got, like, you can see this change in the scenes between inside and outside the planes. We put a high cut filter on when it was inside the planes to simulate that sound of being in a closed area, and kind of being somewhat sheltered from the sheer noise of the engine and the air moving. And then we kind of, for week 2, we moved on to more of like a guitar and more of like a soundtrack sense than a live action, like what we could see was happening. We wanted to create more of like a soundtrack to it. So that ended up with us recording short kind of bluesy metal guitar intros. The thing is, I wouldn't personally call it bluesy, it's being called bluesy on the PowerPoint. I think just an aggressive kind of country sounding, like America, that kind of genre, that kind of intensity of redneck America just seems like kind of such a ballsy way to create something really in your face. And we just ran it through the basic Logic amps. We didn't record any kind of cabs or anything, which is a bit unfortunate, something I'd much prefer to do, but due to lack of time and resources, we didn't have that option. And then after that, we kind of continued working on this project, and we tried to make it a bit more cohesive with one another, having a full track instead of various separate broken parts that often did not quite work well with each other in the way that I was expecting them to, so they weren't used. For week 3, very similar, just drop C guitar, just layering everything, just lots and lots and lots of recordings. I was like, we recorded plenty, and just kind of kept going over, multi-tracking each individual part, sometimes with different sounds, but a lot of the time just playing the same thing over and over again, for sake of it. And then week 4, we collected the Foley, including the metal bin hits, which I felt was quite fun and effective, actually. I feel it was quite random to be able to use the sound of me hitting a bin and then chop it up and run it through a sampler to then be able to use it on Logic as an effect of a gun sound, but it worked. We took quite a few recordings of it, because initially the recordings for the punching the bin was just clipping and distorting and not ideal. So we kept doing it until we got a nice undistorted audio and a nice just punch sound. Then just like quick sampler, and then the arpeggiator was actually the way that the gun sounded so much like a gun. was because it was triggering it to kind of cut off the end of the original sound of the previous sample triggered, which effectively meant that it was kind of like chopping itself, very much like the sound of a gun. You know, like bang 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 bang, and it's kind of like like it's not what's the word for it? It's not kind of muddying itself up by being held down, which is what it might have done had it been a longer sample. But I feel like it was quite effective to be quite snappy and sharp and short. But then also it was quite tricky to bring it in line with everything else because everything else was also very loud at the same time. The volume level was very low. There was very much the sound that was being recorded and everything was not a fully saturated sound, so there was a lot of noise and a lot of everything, but a lot of it was unnecessary noise. I think to make it cut through that was quite difficult. So in terms of like evaluating Dunkirk, I think that what went well was the exploratory techniques we used, such as live sampling and using that in the projects. Um, but what could have got better was the guitar. Um, I feel like we really struggled to create a score that incorporates the guitar into an effective way rather than just having guitar for the sake of guitar. Um, and that's something you can learn from. There are times for guitar times where guitar is not necessary, but we should. I personally feel that leading with guitar, leading a project with a guitar by saying like, "Oh, I want to do guitar line as the main thing," is not a very good way to work because you kind of the guitar would essentially be the last thing I would record in, especially kind of the more lead type guitar, because you're kind of creating a sound and then you're kind of expecting to be able to build everything around it rather than building everything and then adding in the guitar um, in the right way. It might sound different, but it might sound better. Um, I can see myself doing this in real time, in my own time, purely because I do enjoy making wood sounds and audio visual stuff. I think it's quite enjoyable and I think it's quite a unique skill that's not being um, as mainstream as it may have once been, but I feel like there's definitely opportunity in the market compared to say 5 years pre-COVID. In terms of the project, um, I kind of enjoyed a lot of it. I didn't. I think some of the main things I enjoyed was the collaborative work and being able to compare our work to other people's work and listening to their input and just generally being much more of a community. I think that was quite a cool um, thing to happen on this course. What I didn't like was the inconsistency in recording parts and inconsistency with myself to process all audios effectively, such as I should have re-recorded the sound of the monkey screaming, the chorus of monkeys, because it was clipping to such a degree. But I felt like it wasn't necessary because I was running out of time. What would I change next time? As I mentioned, let's not do the guitar till later. So yeah, very similarly, for the primal meeting gorilla clip, um, we did very similar methods. We watched it without the audio, notched down some sounds we wanted and moments that we thought were needed specific sounds, um, and then just came up with kind of like a cowbell 808 beat that kind of seemed splinky. I think that's the best way I could put it is splinky. It was very inconsistent and just kind of bouncy 808s with this cowbell that was just really in your face and was kind of like a melody line rather than anything. And I felt like it was kind of an oxymoron to the what's seen on screen, which was the um, primal early days of man style. Because bringing electronica into history is clash. Like, I think that was a good clash. Um, Such are the things like the chorus of monkeys, bringing in my peers to come and record alongside me, making monkey noises, getting Casey to do the gorilla sound. Um, what else? J-Maz doing the monkey priest thingy sound of the sound of it getting thrown off. He was very effective. The sound because he brought himself away as the monkey fell down, so there was a kind of mimicking the movement of falling off a cliff, falling down a cliff. Which I think was effective. In this animated clip, the Foley sounds we used very minimal, to be honest. So we used this thing called a meat slap to create the impacts. They were very samey, but only used one sample from the impacts because it was just too much, and I didn't feel like re-recording in different tiny, like marginally different impacts at each different character and each different moment. I felt like it was pointless. And then just compress it, chrome glow, and just bring it forwards and make it a bit more present. Make it seem like actual impact, like it's right at the front of the screen, and it is a big moving air. That's kind of thing. So yeah, for the non-diatonic harmonies, that is the on-screen monkeys. Yeah, as you can see on the PowerPoint, it shows very much what happened. Um, and I honestly feel like that part was one of the messiest but most fun things I've done in a while. Overall, for this project, I much preferred the animated clip. I think it was just for me a slightly more my type of film, and I felt like it was a bit easier to work with because I could exaggerate the movements and I could exaggerate the sounds as such in an animation because that is, generally speaking, an animation will be exaggerated and overemphasized in certain parts, such as impacts. What I did not enjoy, the fact that it took us like a week to record a single guitar part. That was ridiculous and it will not be happening again. We can just use school guitars next time, I believe. I feel like that's what I'm going to end up doing. Um, Overall, as this project, if I can see it doing myself in the meantime, as I've mentioned, yes, I do see myself being able to do it in the meantime, in my own time. However, I do struggle with the idea of doing it for no reason, purely because anything like that, I just, suck at that. Um, but I would honestly, I can see myself continuing Foley and working with sound for screen in the future. Uh, that is my presentation done. I hope it's alright.